Let's go back to 2003, when open world games were called GTA clones and Vice City had spent a year being a pretty fun game. Luxaflux, a subsidiary of Activision, decided that to make a game that could rival GTA and break the title of clone was to release the opposite of GTA, where you play as a hotshot cop. And to drive the point home that this wasn't a GTA clone, they stripped it of all the charm, fun, good gameplay, funny lines, and good music. This is True Crime Streets of LA. We begin by giving our character his custom-made license plate. I always pick one that represents how I feel about the protagonist. Then with an opening monologue delivered by Christopher Walken playing unimportant fat cop whose name I don't remember.
I'll take the opportunity.
We learn that Nick Kang is a loose cannon cop, and his father mysteriously disappeared. Due to his fuck the personal safety of others nature, and being suspended from the LAPD, he gets invited to a group called the EOD, who are free to do anything in the pursuit of justice. Then he gets judged for doing anything in the pursuit of justice.
What's Chinese for crazy? No way I'm gonna work with you. You're out of control. I don't need this shit.
He tries to unravel a mystery involving his father's disappearance, which mostly just involves him murdering a succession of Chinese triads.
Well done, Nick.
Piece of cake, Chief.
Then a succession of Russian mobsters.
Swear, that's the Kill him!
Then a legion of zombies and a 300-year-old Chinese man.
I'm only 342 years old.
And his dragon. And his concubines. And his demon heads. This comes out of nowhere and is never brought up again. Not to mention this is a multi-level boss fight and one of the most boring segments in the game. Oh yeah, and then an army of gimps, and finally the North Korean army.
Hanyu Kim, General of the North Korean Army.
If you listen to the story, this might make sense, but I can't bring myself to do that. Oh yeah, he does find out about his dad, by the way, if you cared, which you didn't. If you thought that made it sound exciting, you're actually wrong. Against all odds, this isn't exciting in the least. Plus, the subtitles are poorly done.
Are you playing me, old man?
The story is broken up into half-hour chapters that branch into one another, each containing a set of missions. Successful completion of a chapter leads to an extra bonus cruising scenario, where you can unlock a bigger gun, a new grapple, or a new car to use. There are 3 story paths that each lead to a better ending. That being said, the first and worst ending is actually the best by virtue of being the quickest. Really, there is a fair bit of story here. It's just a very little bit as good. Mostly because of this cunt. Nick Kang is the worst, yet most hilarious protagonist I've ever seen.
What's that? I can't hear you. Oh, you can't hear me either.
And I've played 3 David Cage games. His leading personality trait is that he quips all the fucking time. And he comes off as a complete psychopath who you don't want to see succeed.
Praise everyone! Hold your applause. I told you my kung fu is better, didn't I? Oh shit! It's dim sum time!
The most hilarious cutscenes in the game are the ones that attempt to paint him as troubled.
The Kangs were poor, and being half Chinese, the kids were hassled all the time. I don't know, but I know he loves this city.
They are right. He is troubled. He's beyond fucked up. The kind of man who would destroy his brother's business and be happy about it.
Damn right.
I could forgive this if anything he said is funny, because then it'd be clear they're going for comedy. But it's all awful. All of it.
Kang's Chinese laundry, less starch per stiff.
Nick, stop screwing around.
I'm very glad that canonically, according to me, right after the events of the game, he died in a car fire that he started and ran into. Moving on from the story. If the gameplay is fun, then that could all be ignored, but I find the gameplay to be actually so devoid of enjoyment, intentional or otherwise, at least after the first hour, that I could only resolve to record 2 hours of it before deciding to just reuse footage I got months ago and only replay the least boring parts. On that note, the walkthrough I put up at this game has a really odd number of views, along with comments expressing a nostalgic fondness for the game, some which I've decided mean that I recorded it out of a like for the game. When in actuality it was so me and Noonan could shit on it start to finish. I say this because I first played the game when I was about 10 years old and I found it to be bad. Although admittedly I was wrong, because it turns out the game is actually shit. The big sell of the game was the multiple gameplay styles. Unlike the GTA series which had melee, shooting and driving, True Crime has driving, melee and shooting, and like 3 stealth missions. Also unlike GTA, you're forced to one type of gameplay most of the time, just so you can get the full flavour for each of them. Let's now go through 4 paragraphs about them, each with a lead-in title joke. In True Crime Shin Kicks of LA, fighting is a combination of stupidity, luck, and flailing. Attacks rarely connect, and blocking is pretty much a joke. You've got light kicks, light punches, heavy attacks, and grapples. Plus you can pick up weapons to use. However, you should never use anything but light kicks, and maybe an occasional light punch if you're feeling all fancy. Attempts at defense or strategy will just result in failure most of the time, so just keep kicking them in the shins and you may even take out the final boss on your first attempt.
Yeah, I still got it.
Grapples rarely connect, and the damage they do is marginal anyway. The gimmick of the fights is that after you land a certain number of hits, enemies are stunned, and you can do an unblockable, very powerful attack. I like this feature because it is actually somewhat satisfying and makes combat end sooner. You can also unlock extra moves that you'll never use because shin kicks. Also, quite a few bosses have different movesets, some moves being near impossible to shin kick through. This means that the hardest boss fight in the game is actually really early on and leads to a bad ending anyway, so it's entirely optional. Plus, trying to pull out guns during the melee segments has Nick annoy you with unfunny lines, while at the same time not pulling out his guns, and that's the worst part really.
Can't give in to the dark side.
In True Crime Shoot Dodge of LA, they've tried to go for a run and gun style, and to a degree they've succeeded. The way to win is pretty much exactly the same as melee, but from further away. Just never ever stop running and shooting. Keep tapping that shoot button and you'll win. You can pick up bigger guns, you can grab health, you can shoot dodge, but fuck that, it steals time you could be tapping the shoot button. There's also a really awful precision aim. Controls on this are far too sensitive and the lock-on rarely works. Only use it when you absolutely have to.
Double the pleasure, double the pain.
That sniper was good. He must have worn a vest.
It's
Wait,
like
was he
just
wearing it on his
faded into the
face?
night.
There are also optional unlocks that make your gun look like a fucking toy. The best of which is the flashlight, because outside of the section where you unlock the flashlight, you'll never need the flashlight. Ever again. It's a pointless upgrade. In shooting sections, they sometimes dot hostages around, but there's a negligible penalty for shooting.
My bad.
And health packs, which do nothing when shot. In True Crime Sneak Attack of LA, stealth is the least poorly implemented part of the game, and only appears about 3 or 4 times. You have 3 ways of taking guys down that each affect morality differently, which I'll get into later. The stages are laid out well enough, and you can guess pretty easily what route works quite quickly. Plus there are pretty standard but well implemented hazards, such as glass or trash, but when stepped on draws attention. There is some trial and error, but you rarely lose so much progress that it feels unfair. Enemies take a good 5 seconds to spot you though, so most of the time you can actually just charge them head on and do a one-hit KO, that Nick conveniently forgets during the actual fight scenes. These parts aren't really that fun, but unlike the rest of the game, they aren't anti-fun.
Ninja's got nothing on me.
In True Crime, Shopping Trolleys of LA, cars handle less like cars and more like shopping trolleys. They can turn, but they aren't happy about it. Luckily, crashing isn't too much of a risk, as there is near enough no traffic on the map at any time. I guess everyone else in LA realised how bad driving is.
Now let's see you get to the Beverly Center pronto.
In this traffic?
Plus, the slightest turn will make the wheels screech, and this hurts my ears, so I don't like it. Cars in general just aren't fun to use, which in an open-world driving game is a pretty bad thing. Not to mention driving has the most unique objectives, chases, timed missions and tailing, none of which are actually fun. Because chases have awful rubber banding and require driving the car at high speeds, which means dealing with the Xbox 360 emulation lag. Timed missions require you to traverse large sections of a boring city. Also, the minimap isn't terribly helpful in these sections. Generally it points in the right direction, but it can put you on the wrong road and make you take a long route. And tailing missions, well, tailing missions are near enough always terrible, and this game would be the last place to look for an exception. There's no quick travel and you have to manually drive to each new objective, and later in the game they space these things out over one of the most dull sandboxes I've ever explored. The game recreates LA. Now, I don't know much about LA, other than that this game recreates it. But if this is true to life, then LA is the dullest, most needlessly large city ever constructed. It's a boring, empty grey mass that some poor bastard had to assign street names to. You can explore it between objectives if you want to, but all to do here is unlock new moves which you'll never use, new gun parts which are vaguely helpful and make cutscenes hilarious, and driving manoeuvres, that I didn't even bother to record one. The other drawer is the randomly occurring crimes you can resolve, which give out badges to spend on upgrades, and morality if you resolve crimes correctly. There is a rather large pool of random crime, but for an hour or two you can enjoy this. But it runs on the same base gameplay, so the novelty wears thin pretty quick. It's better than the story missions though. Plus here you can see the AI at its height. Why do I get penalised for harming these idiots again? That question was asked so I could now talk about morality. This is one of the first games I can recall playing that has a karma meter, and it definitely feels like an early attempt at it. It's a bit black and white. Your morality number falls below 0 and you become a bad cop, and the rest of the story is locked until you raise it back up to 0. What affects the morality bar can be arbitrary. Shooting a gunman in the chest is fine, shooting in the head, bad.
Mess with the best, bleed like the rest.
Hitting with a car, fine. Beating up civilian, bad. Stealing their cars, fine.
Give me your car, your keys, and get your ass out. Nice wheels. What a shame.
Random frisking, fine. In fact, rewarded if you get results, because fuck basic rights. The poorest implementation is present in the stealth missions. Basically, the move that nets you morality is by far the most practical move. The killing attack is needless, being both longer and harder to pull off than a non-lethal one.
Snap, crackle, pop.
I mean, switch them around to make it sensible. A quick neck snap for evil and a longer chokehold for good. You know, basically evil should be easier right now and have repercussions later. In a game like this, a morality bar is a good idea and it makes sense, but poor implementation makes it ultimately pointless. But basically, if you ever fall into bad cop status, this will be the only game where you ever need to grind morality so you can keep playing the main story. But luckily morality is plentiful and easy to come across. The game clocks in at around 4 to 6 hours, and that's when going after all the story routes. For that time you have about 5 different mission types: shoot, fight, stealth, drive fast, and drive slow. That's a decent variety, it's just a shame that it's built on bland gameplay. Each and every one. For a game of this length, that many differing scenarios should be able to hold interest, but each is so shallow and repetitive it just makes it worse. I'm uncertain if Luxaflux couldn't make decent games, having only played 3 other games that they've developed, or if they were overly ambitious about trying to make an open world game with multiple gameplay styles and fell flat by overstretching themselves. I mean, the game does come off as ambitious at times, but only by scale. It has a large city, but it's devoid of anything interesting to do. 3 gameplay styles that each handle distinctly and have different control schemes. 3 big-name voice actors consisting of Christopher Walken, Gary Oldman, and Mako, and a big conspiracy plot. A decently sized pool of music including tracks made especially for the game. The shame is that it has tedious gameplay, boring, annoying characters, and fuck-awful dialogue. I mean, even though the main character is played by Russell Wong, who is, and I quote from IMDb, a sexy, charismatic leading man whose good looks are matched by his skills as an actor. It just couldn't save Nicholas Kang Wilson, and everything else in this game.
Damn shame. All shut up and no place to go.
So, what became of all this? Well, there was a sequel taking place in New York that general consensus says is worse. I haven't played it in years, so I couldn't say. Another sequel came about years later called True Crime Hong Kong, but it was cancelled a couple months before release. That wasn't the end though. It changed hands, got a title swap, and it became Sleeping Dogs, and is a genuinely good game with fun gameplay and an interesting story. So I guess there is a happy ending for the True Crime series, it just had to stop being True Crime first. And no Nick Kang. Seriously, fuck that guy.